My name is Mackenzie, also known as M to the Third, and this is a tutorial for my Besitos baby blanket. In this video, I'll guide you through the process to knit this pattern from start to finish. First, we'll cover the materials you'll need, then we'll go step by step from casting on to the 4-row pattern repeat. The video will provide all the instructions you need to knit your own blanket, but if you'd like a PDF version, it's available on my website and Ravelry for a small fee. I wrote this pattern for both the confident beginner and more seasoned knitter. I have been on the hunt for a baby blanket with the perfect potato chip stitch pattern. After searching Ravelry and beyond, I finally decided the best option was for me to design it myself, and now I get to share it with you. I've separated the chapters in this video to make it easier for you to skip around and find the help you need. If you have any questions about the pattern, please leave a comment below, and happy knitting! I used 2 Barocco yarns to make this baby blanket, the first of which is Wizard, a color-changing chainette yarn that is lightweight and superwash. The colorway I'm showing here is Barrel, and I used 2 skeins in the baby blanket. The sample I show in the beginning uses Real Gar, and I'll make sure to link all of the yarn down below. I chose Vintage Chunky to pair with Wizard. It's also superwash and made of a blend of wool and acrylic. The entire vintage line from Barocco is one of my favorites to recommend for baby knits, and it creates a wonderfully squishy fabric, especially when knit in Garter Stitch. In total, I used 3 skeins of Vintage Chunky. This colorway is called Spruce, and the colorway I used in the sample is called Oats. For my needle, I used a US 10.5, also known as a 6.5 millimeter, 24-inch circular needle. My favorite brand to knit with are Chiaogu needles, but use whatever you're comfortable with or have on hand. You're also going to need a bunch of stitch markers. These removable ones are my favorite, but use whatever you have. I recommend having 26 stitch markers total. You'll see why in a bit. And you'll also need a pair of scissors and a tapestry needle for finishing your blanket. You can of course substitute any chunky weight yarn. I'll list some alternative options at different price points down below. Once you've gathered your supplies, we're ready to cast on. Grab both of your yarns, and if any of your yarns are in the skein, make sure to wind it into a ball before beginning. The color changing yarn is yarn A, and the solid is yarn B. If you're using different yarns, just make sure to designate one of them as yarn A and the other as B. We're beginning with yarn A. I recommend using the long tail cast on for this baby blanket. However, if you've done the long tail cast on before, you know that it can be tricky to designate enough yarn in your long tail to make sure you don't run out before you finish casting on the correct number of stitches. If you have a skein that's wound like this, find both ends of the yarn. If you don't have a center pole ball, you can also just use 2 ends from 2 separate balls of yarn. Once you have both of your ends, make a slip knot holding both ends together. Your slip knot should have a loop consisting of both strands of yarn. Once you have your slip knot, grab your needles and place the slip knot onto the needle in your right hand and tighten. Now you'll see that since both strands connect to the full skein, there's no worry about running out of yarn before finishing the cast on, which is especially helpful when knitting a blanket. So we're gonna cast on 117 stitches. The first double-stranded slip knot at the beginning does not count as a stitch. To do the long tail cast on, you want to tension both strands of yarn with the pinky and ring finger of your left hand. Then you're going to take your pointer finger and thumb and place them between the 2 strands of yarn, making an L shape. Then you're going to flip your hand around so that your palm is facing up and you have 2 strands of yarn wrapped around your pointer finger and thumb. With your right hand needle, you'll now go under the first strand, wrapped around your thumb, over the first strand, wrapped around your pointer finger. Then you'll tighten the strands to be taut but not tight around your right hand needle. That's our first cast on stitch, and we're going to continue to do that 117 times. After casting on all 117 stitches, you're going to want to slide that first slip knot off of the end of your needle and pull out the knot. Next, you'll have to detach one of the ends of your long tail cast on. Since I like pulling from the center of my skeins, I'm going to cut the strand connected to the outside of the ball of yarn. When you do this, make sure to leave enough of a tail that you'll be able to weave it in at the end. Now we're ready to begin knitting our setup round. This round will be where we place all the stitch markers that'll make knitting the next rows a lot easier. To begin, knit 10 stitches. Next, place a stitch marker on your needle. Slip the next stitch purlwise. Then, place one more stitch marker on your needle. Finally, you're going to knit 7 more stitches. Next, place a stitch marker on your needle. Move the yarn to the front of your needle as if you're getting ready to purl. Then slip the stitch purlwise from your left needle to your right without knitting it. Move your yarn back to the knit position and place another stitch marker. You're going to continue to knit 7, place a marker on either side of the 8th stitch, and alternate between slipping one with yarn in back and then slipping one with yarn in front. When you're down to the last 10 stitches of this row, you're going to want to knit 7 more stitches and then finally slip the last 3 stitches with the yarn in front. The 3 edge stitches on either side of the blanket will always be slipped with yarn in front. This creates a neat I-cord border on either edge of the blanket. After this round, you should have 13 stitches separated with markers. 7 stitches should be in between each slip stitch, and there should be 10 stitches at each end. Next, we'll begin our 4-row pattern repeat. Rows 1 and 2 will be knit with yarn B. You do not need to cut yarn A before starting the next row. Since there's only 2 rows between each color change, the yarn can be carried up along the side to begin knitting the next row. To start row 1, you want to knit to the first marker with yarn B, making sure to leave a long enough tail to be woven in at the end. When you get to the marker, slip it, then bring your yarn to the front and slip the stitch between the markers. Next, you'll knit 7 stitches to the next marker and slip 1, but this time with yarn in the back. The last 3 stitches on every row want to be slipped with the working yarn held to the front, which is what I'm pointing out here. Row 2 is where the first real variation on the pattern begins. Continuing with yarn B, we're going to knit to the first marker. After slipping the first marker, we're going to knit the stitch sectioned off. Once the markers are back in place, we're going to knit 7 stitches to the next marker, where we're going to slip that stitch with yarn in front. For row 3, we're back to knitting with yarn A. At this point, you may begin to get into the rhythm of the pattern. To start, we're going to knit to the first marker. We're going to slip that first marked stitch with yarn in front. Then we're going to knit to the next marker and knit that sectioned off stitch, continuing that pattern until the end. Your last stitch should be slipped with yarn in front, leaving 10 stitches left on the needle, of which you'll knit until 3 stitches remain, all to be slipped with yarn in front. At this point, you should just be beginning to see the slip stitch pattern starting to take shape. The final row of the pattern repeat is also knit with yarn A. We won't be knitting any of the marked stitches, only slipping. As usual, you'll begin by knitting to the first marker. The first marked stitch is slipped with yarn in back. After that, knit to the next marker and slip with yarn in front. Then alternate these 2 slips. Once you've slipped all the marked stitches, knit to the last 3 stitches and slip all 3 with yarn in front. And there you have it, the 4-row pattern repeat. I will put the text of each of the 4 rows up next, one at a time for your reference. If you're a note card knitter, you can screenshot each of these screens to print out and keep with you while you're knitting. To finish your blanket, continue knitting these 4 rows until your blanket measures 32 inches. End with a row 2 before completing your last 2 rows. For your second to last row, you're going to knit row 3 as written, while also removing all of the stitch markers as you come to them. Last but not least, you're going to bind off all your stitches loosely. At this point, all you have to do is weave in your ends, and voila! You should have a completed baby blanket. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you can leave me a tip via Ko-Fi via the link below. And again, if you'd like a PDF version of the pattern, you can get a copy both via my website, m2the3rd yarn.com, or Ravelry. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below, and happy knitting.